You want to own a medieval mint. You picture gold and silver pouring across a workbench, the king's face stamped into soft metal, coins spilling into sacks destined for markets across the kingdom, and you standing at the center of it all, richer with every strike of the hammer. Then you open the record of what actually happened to men who ran mints when something went wrong. In 1124, King Henry I of England summoned his moneyers to Winchester, not for a bonus, not for a warning. The Chronicle of the time records that many of them lost a hand. Some lost more than that. The king had decided his coinage was being cheated, and he settled the matter personally on the men who struck it. That is the part the romantic version leaves out. You are not just running a workshop. You are running a workshop where the raw material is precious metal, the customer is the crown, and the penalty for getting the numbers wrong is not a fine. We're going behind the furnace and into the dyes. We'll open a royal mint somewhere in England around the 12th century, follow the silver through every hand it passes, and find out whether this was ever a business you'd actually want. First, understand what you are not buying. You are not buying a factory that manufactures money out of nothing. A mint owns no silver of its own. Every ounce that enters the building belongs to somebody else first, a merchant, a lord, a monastery, an ordinary landholder who has old coin worn thin or foreign silver from a trade deal and needs it turned into currency the crown will actually recognize. What you are buying is the right, granted personally by the king, to take other people's metal and hand it back to them as coin, minus a cut. That right had a name, and it was not casually given out. Domesday Book, the great survey the Normans conducted of their new kingdom, records dozens of English towns with mints operating inside them at once. London, Winchester, York, and smaller boroughs you have likely never heard of, each one licensed, each one accountable, each one striking coin bearing not just the king's image, but the individual moneyer's own name stamped into the metal. That last detail matters more than anything else in this script. Your name is on every coin you make. There is no hiding behind the institution. If the coin is short of silver, the record knows exactly whose hand made it. The unit of measurement for everything that follows is the penny, because the penny is what an ordinary person actually held. 12 pennies made a shilling, 20 shillings made a pound, and a pound of silver by weight was, not coincidentally, meant to become roughly 240 of those pennies once struck. The whole currency system built directly out of the metal itself. An unskilled laborer in this period might earn something on the order of a penny or two for a full day's work. Keep that number in your head. Every sum in this video is worth measuring against a man's daily wage because that is the only honest ruler medieval money gives you. So, the building. A working mint was not the grand vaulted hall you're picturing. It was closer to a fortified workshop, a forge for melting and refining bullion to the correct standard of purity, an assay area where the metal was tested before it was ever struck, work tables for the actual coining, and critically, storage secure enough to hold both raw silver awaiting conversion and finished coin awaiting collection. That security was not optional. You are running a building that, on any given week, might contain more concentrated wealth than anywhere else in the town outside the church treasury, and everyone in the town knows it. Then come the dyes, and this is where the crown's fingerprints are all over your business before you've made a single coin. The dyes, the engraved metal stamps that actually strike the design into a blank piece of silver, were not something a local moneyer was free to carve himself. Dye production was tightly controlled, centralized, and periodically reissued from authority above the local mint, precisely so that no moneyer could quietly strike coin off the books using an unauthorized stamp. You paid for your dyes. You were required to use the current, approved design, and when the crown ordered a recoinage, a periodic, deliberate replacement of the entire currency with a new design, every moneyer in the kingdom had to buy in again, all at once, whether business was good that season or not. Now the staff, because striking coin by hand all day, is not a one-man operation. You need a skilled die sinker or access to one, since the dies wear down constantly under the hammer and need replacing far more often than you'd like. You need assistance strong enough to strike blank after blank with a hammer for hours, and steady enough not to waste good silver on a bent or double-struck coin. You need someone competent at refining, because bullion arrives in the door in every state imaginable. Old worn coin, foreign silver of uncertain purity, melted down plate, and every batch has to be brought up to the legal standard before it can be struck, or the coin that leaves your workshop is lighter than it claims to be. And you need guards, because word travels fast about which building in town has silver sitting in it overnight. None of that touches the part of the job that actually decided whether you got rich or ruined, which is the assay itself. Before bullion could be struck, it had to be tested against the legal standard for purity, commonly described as sterling silver, a fixed proportion of silver to alloy that the entire currency depended on holding steady. Get the assay wrong, deliberately or carelessly, and you are either shortchanging your customer, the man who brought in his silver expecting a fair weight of coin back, or shortchanging the crown, whose entire claim to a trustworthy currency rests on every mint in the kingdom striking to the same standard. There was no room in this business for approximately right. So here is the actual shape of what you're running. Look again at that scene in Winchester in 1124, the moneyers summoned, the punishment carried out. That is not a king losing his temper over a workshop dispute. That is the owner of the entire currency system disciplining the men he has personally licensed to manufacture trust in metal on his behalf. A mint was never really in the business of making coins. It was in the business of manufacturing the public's confidence that a penny was worth a penny, and every hammer strike either reinforced that confidence or quietly eroded it. It takes most people running this business years to understand that the silver is not the product. The trust is the product. The silver is just what the trust is stamped onto. And here's the part almost nobody tells you, the reason this business could turn from profitable to lethal overnight, and it starts with a single word: debasement. Picture the position you're actually in. The crown periodically needs more money than its regular revenue provides: a war, a ransom, a building project, and it has one lever available that no merchant or lord possesses. It can simply order the currency restruck with less silver in it than before, while insisting the new coin is worth exactly the same as the old. Every penny minted afterward contains a little less metal and a little more air. For the crown, this is close to free money. For you, the man whose name is stamped into every coin, it is a trap with your fingerprints on it. The public does not blame the king when the coinage starts looking thin and gray. They blame the moneyer standing at the forge. Clipping, the practice of shaving small slivers of silver off the edge of a coin and passing it along at full value, exploded whenever confidence in the currency wavered, because a debased, inconsistent coinage is exactly the environment where a little extra shaving goes unnoticed. And when the crown eventually cracked down on the resulting mess, as it did violently in 1124, it did not go looking for individual clippers hiding in back alleys first. It went to the men who were supposed to be guaranteeing the standard in the first place. You did not need to have personally cheated anyone. You needed only to be the moneyer whose coin, when tested, came up short. So hold that image for a moment, because everything that follows about how you actually make money in this business happens in the shadow of that forge in Winchester. This was never simply a workshop. It was a personal guarantee backed by your own hand that could be called in at any time. So, knowing that the risk sits at the very center of the trade, where does the actual money come from? The first and most direct stream is the mint's fee itself, commonly called seigniorage and brassage together, though medieval accounts rarely separated them so neatly. When a merchant or lord brought a pound of raw silver to your door, you did not hand back a pound of coins worth of silver in return. A portion was retained, some of it passed upward to the crown as its share for the privilege of coining it all, some of it kept by you to cover the cost of refining, striking, wastage, and your own labor. It sounds like a modest cut on any single transaction. Across a busy market town, with silver flowing through your workshop constantly, that modest cut compounds the same way a slow, patient percentage always does in these stories. The second stream is the recoinage cycle itself, and this is where a policy meant to serve the crown quietly served you as well. Every time the currency was formally renewed, a deliberate act periodically undertaken to keep coinage standardized and to sweep clipped, worn, and debased pennies out of circulation, every single coin in the kingdom theoretically had to pass back through a mint to be reissued. That is not steady daily trade. That is a flood, an entire kingdom's worth of currency funneled through mints like yours all at once, each coin generating a fresh fee on its way back out the door. The third stream is the exchange trade sitting quietly alongside the official minting. Foreign coin, old coin, plate silver, church vessels melted down for cash, all of it needed converting into current, spendable coin before it was any use to its owner, and a mint was one of the very few places in a medieval town equipped to test, weigh, and convert bullion of uncertain origin with any authority. That gave you a position not unlike a banker, quietly, long before banks in the modern sense existed, judging the worth of what walked through your door and taking a cut for the judgment. Add the streams together, the direct fee on new coining, the surge income from recoinage cycles, the quiet exchange trade running alongside it, and the business looks genuinely attractive on paper, steady, essential, protected by royal charter, difficult for a rival down the street to simply undercut because there was no rival down the street. Your license was your monopoly within your town, but every one of those streams still runs through the same narrow gate, the assay, the point where the crown's trust and your own liability meet in a single test of the metal. And the smartest operators in this trade found a way to manage that risk the same way successful operators manage risk in every version of this story, by formalizing exactly who was accountable for what in writing before anything went wrong. The English mint system developed increasingly detailed procedures over the medieval centuries for testing coin quality independent of the individual moneyer, culminating in what became known as the Trial of the Picks, a periodic formal examination in which sample coins were set aside from ordinary production, sealed away, and later tested by an independent jury, historically drawing on the city's goldsmiths against the legal standard the coinage was supposed to meet. That test still exists in England today, run continuously in some form for the better part of 1,000 years, which tells you how seriously this problem was taken and for how long. From your side of the counter, the picks cut both ways. It protected an honest moneyer because a passing trial was public proof your coin met the standard, insulation against exactly the kind of accusation that ended in Winchester. But it also meant there was no permanent way to hide a shortfall. Sooner or later, your box of set-aside coins would be opened and weighed. That is the mechanism that decided who thrived in this trade and who didn't survive it. Not cleverness with the hammer, discipline at the scale. The threats stacking against you, even for a careful operator, were relentless. The first is the crown's own appetite. A king short on funds for a war or a ransom did not experience the temptation to debase the coinage as a moral failing. He experienced it as the obvious solution sitting right in front of him, and every time that lever got pulled, it was your workshop's reputation absorbing the public's anger while the crown kept the difference. The second threat is counterfeiting and clipping by others, a plague on every currency of the period, and one that periodically triggered the kind of brutal, sweeping crackdown that did not always distinguish carefully between a corrupt moneyer and an honest one caught in a bad year's audit. The third threat is the wastage inherent in the work itself, silver lost in refining, in miscast blanks, in worn and broken dies, none of it recoverable, all of it quietly eating into your margin on every batch. And the fourth threat, the slowest but in some ways the most corrosive, is simply that your entire livelihood depended on a license that the Crown had granted and could, in theory, take away, transfer to a rival, or fold into a smaller number of centralized mints entirely, a consolidation that did happen repeatedly across English monetary history as the Crown tightened its grip on coinage over the centuries. You did not merely compete against other mints. You existed at the pleasure of the one customer you could never afford to lose. So, knowing all of it, the fees, the recoinage windfalls, the Crown's own temptation to debase, the ever-present threat of the assay finding you short, was this actually a business worth having? Time to reconstruct the ledger. No complete account book survives that lets us walk a single medieval mint through a full year penny by penny, so what follows, in the spirit of every reconstruction in this series, is built from the documented structure of the trade rather than a lost spreadsheet. In a strong year, steady local trade brings a continuous trickle of bullion through your door, worn coin, foreign silver, church plate, each conversion returning a modest fee. Then a recoinage is ordered, and for a period of months, your workshop is overwhelmed, striking far more coin in that single stretch than in the rest of the year combined. The fees from that surge alone potentially rivaling everything else you've earned in the preceding months. Set against that, your ongoing costs, staff wages paid whether the workshop is busy or quiet, the constant replacement of worn dies, the unavoidable wastage in refining, and the portion of every fee that passes upward to the Crown before you see a penny of it. In a good year, with an honest assay result and no unusual crisis, the surplus that remains could be substantial, particularly for a moneyer positioned in a busy trading town where bullion arrived constantly and a recoinage year multiplied it further. That surplus is what let successful moneying families across medieval England accumulate real standing, land, civic office, positions of trust in their towns that had nothing directly to do with striking coin, but everything to do with the wealth and credibility the mint had built for them. In a bad year, the same workshop looks entirely different. The Crown, mid-war, orders a debasement, and the coin you strike to the letter of the new legal standard is nonetheless the coin the public blames when prices start rising and confidence starts slipping. A PIX trial comes up short, whether through genuine fraud somewhere in your process, an honest error in refining, or simple bad luck in which samples were pulled. And now you are the moneyer under suspicion, your name on every coin in question. The fine, if you are fortunate enough for it to remain merely a fine, can consume years of accumulated profit in a single judgment. And if the Crown decides, as it periodically did across English monetary history, to consolidate minting into fewer, more centrally controlled locations, your license itself can simply cease to exist. The workshop, the equipment, and the reputation you built over years worth nothing the moment the charter is withdrawn. So, who actually got rich in this trade, and who ended up as a name in a chronicle for the worst possible reason? The moneyers who prospered were, almost without exception, the ones who treated the assay as the most important room in the building rather than an inconvenience standing between them and profit. They kept their standards scrupulously consistent, understood that a reputation for honest coin was worth more over a lifetime than any single shortcut, and used the steady, patient income from fees and recoinage cycles to buy their way into land, into civic office, into exactly the kind of standing in their town that a fishmonger's son or a tavern keeper's son in other versions of this story spent a lifetime chasing. Prominent moneying families in England's larger medieval towns are recorded holding civic positions, serving among a town's leading citizens, their wealth traceable directly back to a trade most of their neighbors regarded with a mixture of respect and suspicion, because everyone understood, in the way people always understand about the men who handle their money, that the moneyer's fortune and the town's confidence in its own coinage were the same thing, viewed from two different angles. The ones who didn't survive it are harder to name individually because history is far better at recording a king's punishment than an ordinary man's ruin. But we know they existed because the assize of the moneyers did not happen to one unlucky man. It happened to a room full of them in a single sitting in 1124 because an entire generation of English moneyers had, in the Crown's judgment, let the standard slip. Whatever wealth any of them had accumulated up to that point, none of it protected them once the king decided the coin itself could no longer be trusted. So, the verdict on the title question: could you get rich owning a medieval mint? Yes, if you understood that you were not selling coins, you were selling a guarantee, and that guarantee had to hold every single time, without exception, because the one time it didn't was the only time anyone remembered. No, if you believed the silver flowing through your workshop was simply raw material to be worked and sold at a margin like any other trade good, because silver that leaves your hands a fraction short of the legal standard is not a small manufacturing error. It is a debt against your own name, payable at a moment the Crown chooses, not you. Go back one last time to Winchester, 1124, the moneyers standing before the king. They had not necessarily stolen from anyone directly. Many of them may well have believed their coin was sound. It did not matter. Their names were on the metal, and the metal had failed the test. That is the entire business, distilled into a single afternoon. You were never really striking silver into pennies. You were striking your own name into a promise, over and over, thousands of times a year, and betting your hand, quite literally, that every single one of those promises would hold. The king's face was on the front of the coin. Your name was on the back of the trust that made it worth anything at all.